Josh Topping thought we were making a Super Bowl prediction and just forgot the blue streamers. I can just imagine all the HGH commercials if they win. It'll be awesome. I'm sorry, I was low. I shouldn't have done that. Anyway, we are glad that you're here. We are about to the end of this series. We're going to talk about something today, and then next week sort of put a bow on it and wrap up this new year. It's hard to believe that January is gone just like that, isn't it? Only 11 more months until we're at 2017. But I've enjoyed this series, and I've heard from many of you that you've enjoyed the different things that we've talked about when it comes to margin, because I think the reality is we all just realize how busy we are. We all realize how quick and easy it is to get off kilter, to get out of place, to get in a place that then we look and go, how did I end up here? How did I end up not doing this? How did I end up not doing that? How did I? And so to sort of reorient ourselves at the beginning of the year, not maybe with a bunch of resolutions and a bunch of I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, but maybe more just with an attitude of I'm going to try to build margin into my life. If you've been here, you've heard about margin. You know the definition now by heart. In fact, it was pretty neat. A couple of weeks ago, the youth were at our house, and someone hadn't been there, and somebody said, "Well, what'd y'all talk about today?" And they said, "Margin." They said, "What's margin?" And a bunch of people had the definition just off the top of their head. It's easy to remember and harder to implement in our lives, but margin is the amount available above what is actually needed. It's the extra or the reserve in your life. Now, we talked one week about it's the amount of rest. You know, God commanded us to rest. And we're in a busy day and a busy time, and life speeds up. But God has commanded us to rest. He's commanded us to build margin into the life of our body, so to speak, so that we have some time, some downtime to rest. He also talked about His time, that God set the number of our days before we were ever born. I was harshly reminded of that yesterday as I watched the news last night and heard about a 19-year-old boy who was killed in a car accident the night before, from Middle Georgia here. He went to middle school at Mossy Creek, but 19-year-old, and then also went to a funeral yesterday of a 51-year-old man, just a few years older than myself, who died of cancer. So God has set the number of our days. And we may think we're going to live forever. The reality is we're not going to live forever. And the reality is, for the most part, you don't know how many number of days you have. And so God has set those numbers of days, and so we need to use them appropriately. We need to use them sort of like Carnegie said, let's focus on what's really important. The life of our kids. Last week we talked about the margin of money and how we live in a country today that is debt-ridden. I mean, we are saddled by debt as a nation. I mean, the word trillion, 19, 20, 21 trillion of national debt that we have. And that's really only reflective of a bunch of individuals like ourselves who at our own homes have hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And yet God gives us an idea of how to build margin into our money situation. Not just the 10% that He asks us to give back, but all 100%. He gives us guidance on that. And so that's what we've been talking about, is how to build this margin into our life. Ephesians 5:15 says, so be careful how you live. You have to be intentional about how we live. We live in a society today that if we just sort of left it up to society, it would sway us to and fro. If we are not putting the Word of God into our kids, you can rest assured the society as a whole is not. And so if you just say, well, they'll catch it somewhere, they'll catch it somehow, the reality is they may not catch it at all. Ephesians 5:15 continues on. It says, don't live like fools, which I don't think any of us would ascribe to or aspire to. It says, but live like those who are wise. Live like those who are wise. Why is that so important? Why do we have to be intentional about margin? Why do we have to say to ourselves, no, let's don't swipe the credit card? Why do we have to say to ourselves, no, let's don't add another thing to our calendar? Why do we have to say to ourselves, no, let's don't? Thank you for sitting on the front row. That gives me great confidence today to know you're going to sit there, Kathy. That's awesome. That is awesome. I'm feeling good. I'm glad I wore my blue jacket today. Because left to ourselves, there you go. See, now all y'all wish y'all would have sit up here, aren't you? There you go. Left to ourselves, left to our own sin nature, left to our own desires, left to our own lust, left to our own pride, left to our own arrogance, left to ourselves, if we're not intentional about it, then we will live like fools. If we are just left to ourselves, it's by the power of Jesus and the presence of the Holy Spirit in our lives that we can hope to live as those who are wise. And so that's really what we've been trying to hit the nail with the hammer with throughout this series, is about living like those who are wise. This could be a verse for the year for you. You know, you might put it up on your fridge, or you might put it in your phone or somewhere, but be careful how we live. Do not live like fools, but live like those who are wise. Today we're going to talk about one of those aspects that's really you hear a lot about nowadays, partly because we're in an election cycle. 2016 are going to be full of some important elections. And so you begin to hear this talk more and more when there's an election cycle. But it's a reality, a battle that we fight every single day. And that is the battle for morality. Morality. I went to the dictionary just to get the right words to put a definition on morality or to be moral. It says concerned with the principles of right and wrong behavior and the goodness or badness of human character. Of character. It has some synonyms that are listed in virtuous, good, righteous, upright, upstanding, high-minded, principled. I like that word, principled. Honorable, honest, just, noble, incorruptible, scrupulous, respectable, decent, clean living, law-abiding. I was reminded of that yesterday at that funeral I just mentioned. A 51-year-old man, not much older than myself, married 26 years, 3 boys as his children, 1 granddaughter that he has. And for the last 3 years, he's battled this battle with cancer. He's fought this fight with cancer. And it was sort of, not funny, that ain't even the right word to use, but he had a birthday earlier in the week on the 26th and passed away on the 28th. So he was 51 years old. And I went to the funeral because, for one reason, his son was in our youth group. His oldest son was in our youth group at one point, and I just was hoping to sort of see him and get to, speak to him. But I knew him, and he ran the dry cleaners here at Perry. He was my dry cleaner, probably yours too. And I went to the funeral, and his brother-in-law shared a eulogy. The preacher preached a message. And as they did all of that, as people talked about him and about his life, I couldn't help but think about all of these synonyms I just listed. I couldn't help but think that he was a virtuous man. He was a good man. Heard that many times yesterday. He was righteous. He had a right relationship with God. He was upright. He was upstanding. He was principled. He was honorable. He was honest. He was just. He was noble. I heard all of these synonyms thrown out about this man's life, and it just brought me back again to the place of realizing that one day somebody's going to stand over me. And I don't know what they'll say, but it sure would be nice if they would use some of those words. I would love for them to be able to stand up and say, you know what? He lived as those who are wise. He did not live as a fool. I would love for my kids someday to stand up and say, you know what? He was decent and he was noble and he was upright. And I would just love to hear those words. But we have to be intentional about that. We have to make a plan, or we'll have no plan at all. So what's the definition of moral margin? If that's what morality is, in fact, there's another definition. It says holding or manifesting high principles for proper conduct. High principles for proper conduct. So what's the definition of a moral margin? It's the space between right and wrong. It is the space between right and wrong. And if you want to put it in spiritual terms or spiritual language, it is the distance between righteousness and sin. Righteousness and sin. Righteousness is a biblical word. It talks about being in right standing with God. It is the distance between being in a right standing with God and sin. And we should have a huge moral margin. There should be a huge gap between our standing with God and our relationship with God and sin. There should be distance there. And yet we live in a world today that margin, that gap is ever shrinking. In fact, I would say this to you. From the day our country was founded, our country has always been slipping morally. Sometimes it slips fast and sometimes it slips slow. Sometimes we lose ground in chunks and sometimes we lose ground slow before we even realize it's gone. But we live in a world today that we founded it on biblical principles, and since that day it has been slipping. And so today in our country, the world probably at large, but specifically in our country, our morality is a lot closer to sin than further away from sin. And so it becomes important to us to talk about this. God created a moral margin. I think that's one of the things I've enjoyed so much about this series is when you dig into God's Word and realize God had this all planned from the beginning. God created a moral margin from the very beginning. You may know the story. He created Adam and he said it's not good for man to be alone. So Adam fell into a sleep and he took one of his ribs and he created Eve out of it. And when Adam woke up, he went, well done, God. Good job. That was a good one. And he took Adam and Eve and he placed them in the garden. And in the garden he says, you can have any of this that you want. You can have oranges, you can have peaches, you can have bananas, you can have pecans, you can have cornstalk, you can have corn, you can have potatoes, you can have tomatoes, you can have anything you want in the garden except for this one tree. And he created in the very beginning a margin. All of this is righteous. All of this is okay. Here is sin. And he told him, you can have anything you want in the garden. You can eat of anything. Eat of any tree. Eat of any plant. Just not that tree. And in Genesis chapter 3, again, you know how the story ends. It says, the woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious. And she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. And then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. At that moment, their eyes were opened, and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. I also believe that this is where poison ivy was created, because you don't run through the woods naked if there's poison ivy around. And don't act like you don't know that. But God created a moral margin. He said, all of this is righteous. All of this is good. Hey, eat any of it, all of it that you want. Stay away from the tree. Do not eat of it. And we know the story. Adam and Eve they ate, and introduced sin into our world. And so since then, we have had to battle with this moral margin. Since then, we have had this battle going on between morality of what is right and what is right by God's eyes versus what we may say is right. And you can read all through the Old Testament and all through the New Testament and see story after story after story of where a society said this is okay, but it was against God's word. A society, a culture said, it's okay if we do this. They adopted different behaviors. They adopted believing in other gods. They did all of this different stuff. But God was saying it was wrong. It was sin. You'll pay for that. So I want to make, not today I don't want to make 3 points. I want to make 3 statements. And I'll just say this, the younger you are in here today to hear this, the better it is for you. So if you're in here and you're a middle schooler, I see middle schoolers or high schoolers, some college kids. If you're in here today, I'm going to tell you this is crucial for you to hear, because for the next 20 minutes, you're going to see a bunch of 40, 50, and 60-year-olds shake their heads. Because we're old enough to be able to say, you know what he's saying is true. What he's saying is right. So if you're in here and you're one of our young people, please listen today. Please listen. I know you're thinking, it seems like too far off for I have to worry about this, but please listen to today's message. And here's the 3 statements I want to make. First one is this: society's moral margin is different than God's moral margin. Society's moral margin is different. Sometimes we ask the question, well, is it legal? That's not necessarily the right question to ask. Sometimes we might even say, well, is it moral in our society's eyes? Not the right question to ask, because our society has different standards than God has. There are things that our society say are okay that God has forbidden. There's things that that the society says, it's okay, do it, try it, whatever, that God says it's a sin, stay away, don't touch it. So sometimes we live in this society, we live in this world, and so we look to different things. We look at our news, or we look to our relationships with friends or our coworkers or whatever, and we just look at what they're doing and how they're living, and sometimes we get what we should be doing from that scene instead of asking, what would God want me to do? How would God want me to live? What would God want me to act in this particular way? And sometimes, like I said, our standards are always slipping, and sometimes they slip in chunks. And some of you are old enough that you've watched some of those major chunks fall and collapse. Sometimes they slip very slowly. Let me give you some examples of this. Society would tell you that sex outside of marriage, it could be okay. There's websites that can help you if that's what you're after. But God calls it adultery. Society would say that sex before marriage is okay. I mean, if you're ready and you love each other and the mood is right, but God calls it fornication. Society tells us that gay marriage is okay and all of that, and it's legal and all of that should be acceptable, but God calls it an abomination. Society would tell us that it's okay to tell our children little white lies. Just those little things. They don't really matter a lot, but just those little, you don't want to tell them the truth. And so you just sort of fudge on that. And just those little white lies, God calls it lying. Society would tell us that we should watch out for ourselves and we should do for ourselves and we should be number one on our priority list, while Christ tells us that we should love others as ourselves. Just like with rest and time and money, we need to realize that our society is always going to be squeezing our moral margin out of our lives. Society is always going to try to squeeze us to change. And here's what's interesting. Society changes its views. Society changes its mind, but God does not change His mind. God does not change His standards. God does not go, it's 2016. Let's just forget about those things. And so we have this battle that we fight with our morality and our moral margin, and we live in a society that's trying to tell us, well, you're a bigot, you're blinded, you're narrow-minded, you're hard-headed, but you're even mean, they'll say, because you won't accept this or accept that or accept that. And we live in a society like that. And I wondered, why is that so prevalent? And I found the answer this week in 1 John. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16 says this. It says, "For the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure, does it not? We live in a sexualized society." I mean, commercials for shoes are put on by people twerking and jerking. I mean, commercials are sexualized. Movies are sexualized. TV shows are sexualized. In fact, I've seen this happen in the last 10 years. There were shows that Austin and Blake watched, those kids shows that you're sort of like teenage shows. You know what I'm talking about? Well, those teenage shows have become very sexualized. And so where it was the sweet life of Zach and Cody, now it's the sweet life of Zach, Cody, and their girlfriends or whatever. And so even our shows become more and more and more sexualized. There was a day when you did not hear a cuss word on TV. In fact, some of us are in here old enough to remember the first cuss word we heard on TV because it shocked us. And yet today you can watch anything at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and you'll hear profanity. You see, that's just how society changes morality, but how God has never changed His standard. So that's a battle that we fight. It says we offer a craving for physical pleasure. The world offers a craving for everything we see. Are we not like that? Boy, I know I am. There's nobody in this room today that wants a new car more than I do. Man, I ride by this. There's a couple car lots I ride by every day, and every day I just look. Man, I would like to have that. Man, I wish I could get that. Aren't we just that way? The third thing the world offers is a pride in our achievements and our possessions. I know I'm that way a lot of times. These are not from the Father, but are from this world. You see, that's why our society is always changing. And that's why society will always squeeze the margin in our lives. And that's why it's up to you and I to be intentional, to live as wise by asking ourselves, what does God say about it? Not what does society say about it. Here's the second statement. And young people, I hope you really hear this. Decide on your moral margin long before you ever have to use it. Decide your moral margin. Draw your lines in the sand long before you ever put yourself in the point of actually having to use it. Here's two good questions you could always ask. How far is too far? How far is too far on a date? How far is too far in a relationship? How far is too far on prom night? Because I have this statement. I should just read it because I'll screw it up if I don't. It says, if you don't decide ahead of time, your hormones will decide for you, and they never make the right decision. If you don't decide ahead of time, these are my lines in the sand. If you don't decide ahead of time and you just say, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, you will be on the other side of the bridge before you ever realize what happened. So we have to decide our moral margin before we ever have to use it. How much is too much? I battle with this one. How much is too much food? You know? I mean, should I always feel miserable after a meal because I've ate too much? How much is too much alcohol? How much is too much dishonesty? How much is too much deceit? How much is too much in our lives? We need to decide our moral margin, because left to ourselves, left to our human brain, left to our human bodies, without the presence of God's Word, the presence of Jesus Christ in our lives, and the power of the Holy Spirit to help us, folks, we will squeeze the morality out of our lives. I want to read a quick story today. It's actually just sort of the middle of a story. It's not the beginning of the story. Don't have enough time to read that. It's not the end of the story. Don't have enough time to read that. But right in the middle of this man's life, he had the opportunity to make a decision. And in all honesty, he probably could have decided either way, except for the fact that God was watching and that God was going to have this written. The book of Genesis, chapter 39, it's a story of a man named Joseph. And Joseph had some bad things go against him, had some things happen that you wouldn't want to happen to you. But if you read the beginning of his story, what you find out is every step of the way in Joseph's life, God blessed him. God protected him. God took care of him. In fact, he made it so apparent that God was with Joseph, that Joseph even got some privileges later, that the king was like, look, God's hand is on him. I want him near me. God's hand is, he can tell these dreams. I want him near me. I want to be able to talk to him, bring him to me. I want to get his advice, let him tell me. And at this point in his life, Joseph has been put in charge of Potiphar's house. You say, what does that mean be put in charge of? He handled everything at Potiphar's house. It would be like you being the assistant to a really, really rich billionaire. And he just says, you know what? Just do whatever you need to do with my house. Do whatever you need to do with my automobiles. Hey, if you feel like I need something new, go get it. If you feel like something's outdated, get rid of it. Whatever you need to do, you handle all of my affairs. It's almost like having a blank check of do whatever you want to, just handle all of my affairs. And so in chapter 39, Joseph is sort of hit with a situation. In verse 6, it starts here and says this. Let me get my... Verse 6, it says, so Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything that he owned. Basically a blank check. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about anything except what kind of food. In other words, Potiphar's only decision that day was steak or chicken. He woke up, do I want a salad for lunch? Or do I want to go sort of heavy today? Should I have eggs for breakfast? I mean, that's how easy Potiphar's life had gotten because of Joseph. So Joseph was a very handsome, well-built young man. I know y'all could connect with that. Y'all see me up here. I get that. It says, and Potiphar's wife in verse 7 soon began to look at him lustfully. Come and sleep with me, she demanded. Now you have to realize this is the man in charge's wife. So some might say she's the most powerful person. But it's the man in charge's wife talking to his assistant saying, look, I think you're looking pretty good. Come and sleep with me. Verse 8, but Joseph refused. Look, he told her, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? Now get this. It would be a great sin against God. See, here's the interesting thing about that. He didn't say this would be a great sin against Potiphar. He didn't say, hey, this would be a great sin against your husband. He said, this is a great sin against God. And one of the things that we need to learn is that whenever our morality slips, whenever we squeeze the morality out of our lives, it isn't as much a sin against our nation or a sin against our children or a sin against somebody else. It is always a sin against God. Verse 10 says she kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day, but he refused to sleep with her. And he kept out of her way as much as possible. He was running around the house trying not to run into her. One day, however, no one else was around when he went to do his work. So get this, nobody's there. She came and grabbed him by his clothes, demanding, come on, sleep with me. Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand as he ran from her house. Here's what's important about that. One, he could have got away with it. Nobody was there, just him and her. He could have said, okay, I fought you long enough, tried to put you off, okay. But he had decided long ago, way back here, that he would honor God in his life. When he was in the bottom of a hole, a pit, he had decided he would honor God with his life. When he was in prison, he had decided he would honor God with his life. Way back here, he decided, I will honor God. So that way over here, when this woman is grabbing me and trying to pull me into her bed, he could pull away. He had decided long before he ever had to use his moral margin what his standard and line would be. And he based it on what God had said in his word to do. So he knew, I cannot commit adultery with this woman. It would be a great sin against God if I did that. And so he pulled himself away, and he basically ran out of the house naked. And if you read further in the story, you know that at that moment it didn't work out too great for him, because the woman lied about him and got him thrown back in prison. But Joseph had decided long ago, I will honor God with my morality. Here's the third statement today. We're close to ending. The slippery slope slides hard and fast with devastating consequences. Have you heard that before? There's a big decision coming down, and you'll hear people say, well, that's a slippery slope. Our country has had a lot of slippery slopes. All you have to do is look back to the founding of our country, the U.S. Constitution, the founding papers. And it isn't that any of those men were perfect. It isn't that any of those men were sinless. It isn't that any of those men, but our country was founded on godly principles. And yet since then, as we see the slippery slope, you know, there was taking God's word out of our schools. There was a time, and again, young people, this will just blow over your head, but there was a time you started every day with a prayer in every school. And you would start the day you would start an assembly with a prayer. You would start an athletic event with a prayer. And yet that just sort of disappears. There was a time when abortion was illegal, and it wasn't because nobody wanted to care for these mothers who were in these bad situations. It was because it was murder. And yet that sort of went away. There was a time when we had standards, and to be quite honest with you, it always is slipping. And what we need to realize is sometimes it slides hard and it slides fast, and it has devastating results. I want to show you this quick video that I got off of Facebook by way of YouTube. This is something that's happened just the last couple of weeks out in California. Heather, you got that?
I'm in Pacifica, California, and it has one of the most gorgeous views you'll ever see, but for a lot of folks who live here, things right now are very dangerous. That's because there's been so much rain in the month of January, and it has caused part of the cliff to collapse. There is this apartment complex that is sitting gingerly on top of it, and all of the doors have been yellow tagged. That means that you essentially have to get all of your belongings and move as quickly as possible.
I mean, I've watched pieces of cliff fall, and I've watched a piece just kind of like separate and fall off. When I saw that happen, I knew like it really isn't a joke. That cliff is really falling.
I mean, it's got a killer view, but I don't want to be in that killer view. So, yeah, it's frustrating. Definitely frustrating.
People are keeping a very close eye on these cliffs to see if there's any more erosion, any more crumbling, and whether or not more residents are going to be forced to leave.
Did you see how close those apartment complexes were to just disappearing? A little bit more of that cliff gives way, that whole apartment complex is gone. I started digging around on the internet, and I found other news reports and other accounts from other places. And it was amazing some of the footage that people had, because when those houses were there was some gap. There was some margin to the edge of the cliff. That's probably what was exciting about those people moving into that apartment, going, look, man, we're living on the coast. I'm just look out, I see this beautiful ocean. Man, I got this gap. I'm safe. And then over time, these rains and the waves have eroded the margin. It's ate away. Sometimes, some days slowly. Some days there's been huge collapses. Folks, that's where you can be personally in your moral life. There can be things happening in our lives, and sometimes they're happening slowly, but sometimes they happen in huge gaps. That's what can happen in our church if we're not careful. Those times when our morale or our morality may slip gently, or times it may collapse. That is where we are at in our country. We have watched slow slippage, and sometimes we've watched some huge gaps some huge things happen. See, here's how God would line it up for us. God would say, here is sin. Name the sin, whatever you're lying, stealing, fornication, adultery, whatever sin you want to list. Here it is. Here's what God would say. You stay over here. You stay. Here's my word. My standard is over here. Long ways away from there. If you stay over here in my word, if you stay over here in my presence, if you stay over here and you will live your life according to my standards, you don't have to worry about that destruction over there. But so many of us inch closer. Maybe there's something happened in your life and there was a huge slip. And instead of getting back away from the edge, sometimes we continue to see how close to the edge we can get. There probably have been a few people there in that apartment building that tried to do that. Let me just see, how close can I get? Folks, that's where a lot of us are with our morality. You say, well, I haven't sinned, but you're seeing how close you can get without it. Instead of staying back, instead of having margin and saying God's word is over there and I need to stay close to that, many of us are trying to get as close as we can to the line. God would tell us you need margin. So how do we reverse the trend? How do we turn back the time, so to speak? I always, I hear people talk about, and people who are older than myself talk about, well, I remember when, and I'm just, I don't know, I like the microwave. I'm glad they came up with it. I like the cell phone. But I remember when. Well, here's how we turn back the time. First thing you have to do is you have to start personally. This isn't one of those issues you have to worry about your neighbor. This isn't one of those issues you have to worry about your spouse. This isn't one of those issues that you need to worry about everybody else. This is one of those issues where you just need to worry about you. You just need to ask yourself, where is my moral margin? You need to ask yourself, how close to the line am I? You need to ask yourself, have I had in my life some big slips in my morality? Have I allowed society to influence me? Have I allowed my coworkers to change my views away from what God's word would say? Have I allowed this world that I live in to offer me the pleasures of my eyes and the pleasures of possessions and the pleasures of the things I want to do? Have I allowed myself to get there? You just have to worry about yourself personally. 2 Chronicles 7:14 is a very popular verse, and many of you know it by heart. It says, if my people, so God even takes it a step further. He says, look, if the Christian people, if the believers will humble themselves. And he doesn't even start, if the world would get its story straight, if the world would get it right, if society would just straighten up. He says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways. See, in that verse there's this huge dichotomy. My people, we need to turn from our wicked ways. My people that are called by God's name turn from our wicked ways. I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and restore their land. So it starts with us. It starts with me as a believer, humbling myself, seeking God's face, asking for forgiveness. And it begins with each of us individually. And God says, I will hear from heaven. I will forgive your sins. I will restore their land. This is one of those statements I'm going to make that I can't back it up with anything. It's really more of a question. Could it be that our world, our country is in the place it's in today, not because of the ungodly, but because of the godly? Could it be That the things that have passed recently and the things that have passed over the last 30 years that have eroded morality wasn't because there was some evil, mean, wicked person pushing a bill or pushing a law. Could it be that it was the godly who didn't have any interest in it at the time? Maybe you thought that'll never pass. That's so ridiculous. Could it be that our country is in the place it's in because of us? If my people, God says, who are called by my name, He says, will humble themselves. So it starts personally, individually, with each and every one of us. And then as the church collective, as the church across the nation, you know, it's amazing that I am of a generation that saw I saw churches active and standing up against many of the things that were happening in our country. I saw preachers. I heard stories. I saw the time when the church stood up. But today, the church doesn't stand up much anymore, does it? If we'll start personally, and then we bring all that together collectively, then maybe, just maybe, our society could regain its morality. Maybe, just maybe. It may not be in my lifetime. We didn't lose it all in a lifetime. We're not going to get it all back in a lifetime. But maybe, just maybe, if individually we would, and then collectively we could, then maybe society would regain its moral margin. I'll ask you to do two things this week. I'm actually going to ask you to do one thing today. Today we're going to end this time with a time of prayer. And I'm going to invite you, as the band will be singing a song and all that, I'm going to invite you to come forward and pray. And you may need to pray. You need to come and humble yourself and say, God, I have slipped. God, I have let things in. God, I have done things. God, I have, and just confess and repent to Him and bring that to Him. But also you may want to come forward and pray for our country. Because our country is in a crucial spot. Our country is in a crucial situation. And I know in years past we've probably thought, well, it's no really big deal. Nothing major is going to happen. But folks, we're in that spot and of that day when some major things are happening. And so in just a minute after I pray, just a quick prayer, I'm going to invite anybody and everybody to come forward and pray while the band sings. The second thing I'm going to ask you to do is to watch that session 5 of Take It to the Limit. I don't know how many of you have taken advantage of that throughout this series. Those sessions have been incredible. And I'll just say this, if you haven't watched any of them, you've just cheated yourself. But you need to watch session 5. If you don't have Right Now Media, you don't have access to that, just put that on the connection card, put your email address, and Right Now Media, I'll have you an invitation tomorrow. You can go on there and watch the videos. But let's start with prayer. Let's start with ourselves. And then we'll worry about the church collective, and then we'll worry about our society. Father God, this morning,